Good morning again, or good afternoon, wherever you be. This is Larry Nicholas, and this is the Father's Ministry. Last week we talked about shame. We talked about the Garden of Eden, and sometimes we have people who speak into our lives who speak into our lives negative things. And the question we left you with, who told you that? Who told you that you weren't good enough? Who told you you weren't valuable? Because people live under shame. Under fear of being exposed, under fear they're not good enough. They're never going to amount to anything. They're never going to be who they are. And we want to continue that talk today. But right now, as I said last week, I'm down in Colorado Springs with a good friend of mine named Joe Couch, who runs a ministry called Revolution 5. And I'm out here speaking to his students and some others and his staff. So I'm going to introduce Joe right now, and he'll give a little background on that, and then we'll get into the next part of shame, the enemy of the soul.
I'm Joseph Couch, as Larry said, and I'm the Executive Director for Revolution 5 Leadership Institute. And we've had the privilege of having Larry come and speak to our students and staff for over a decade now, and has always been a powerful time. But we just had a few minutes with the staff and continuing with this idea of shame, the enemy of the soul. And there was a couple significant connections that rose to the surface specifically for us as a leadership school, full-time program training collegians in leadership development here in the Springs, but there's a specific connection to this idea of shame as it relates to vulnerability in a community, and even ultimately as it pertains to creativity of leaders and creating a culture where shame is not the norm, or where shame doesn't exist inside of your culture. So maybe, Larry, if I can just start by asking you to highlight, you drew a specific connection between where shame is in a culture, or wherever shame comes in, it competes or limits, works against vulnerability, which, as we know, is one of the quintessential foundations for leaders. Would you mind sharing for a few minutes about the connection with shame and vulnerability?
Yeah. Okay. Shame and vulnerability. What it has to do with is when you start a Christian community or a leadership institute down here, the purpose is to create a family where people are free to make mistakes, free to learn, free to say, I don't know. See, learning makes you vulnerable, because what you're admitting, I don't know something. For example, if sometimes people are talking and they use a word you don't know, they just use a word you don't know, and you're too ashamed to say, hey, I don't know what that means. So you keep to yourself. It's a little thing, but it speaks to you the fact that I got some shame on me. So I came down here to speak, because I do every year for about a decade, a little better. And I talk to the students, and I also talk to the staff about shame and about creating a culture down here, we're calling, or a community that can be free of shame. Now, this is a big order, because as I talked to the staff today, I began to realize, because there was question and answers, it's a big thing we're attempting, and how much shame intertwines everything of who we are. The first thing about it, when you try to create a community, which could be a church, which should be a church, or a Christian organization, there needs to be a sense that people are free to share things. One of the other things we talked about, we might not get into, is creativity. But learning, and that people have a voice to say what's going on in the organization you work with. If you don't feel you have a voice, chances are you won't stay long. So the first thing we have to work with is where they came from. Because you come from a community, you come from a family. And your family either encourages your creativity, encourages you to be all that God's created to be, or they will little by little stifle you. Now, they don't have to say it, they can give it in their body language. Some people, they raise their kids and they got their whole life planned out for them. We got married, we had children, you go to college, this is the way it is. And they map it all out. That if anything upsets that, they don't know what to do. So then all of a sudden you have a child who doesn't want to go that route, and then it causes a lot of turmoil in the family. Because when they say it, whoever it is, let's say it's a young girl, says, well, I don't want to follow that. I want to try to do in Christian ministry and not go into the family business, not go to the family college everybody goes to. And they keep saying, we were married, we had children, you go to college. They keep repeating the thing because that's all they know. They don't even know why you're saying what you're saying. But there's subtleties, and they'll say stuff, well, that's okay. You can try that for a while. That's what they'll say to you. which means it's not right, but you can try that. And after you, try that, you'll come back to the thing we've had planned for you ever since you were born. But it's not the way it's supposed to be. Creativity is what's supposed to be. Vulnerability is that I don't know things. If you ever notice a child, they ask questions all the time. They interrupt you and ask questions. They do it all. Why? Because they're vulnerable. And they're free to be who they are. They're not worried about what other people think about them just yet. The longer we go, the more we grow, the more our fear of what people think about us begins to affect who we are. And one of the big things in shame is you deny it. You deny that's there. You deny this. You deny that. So what happens is you continue to live in shame because the older you get, it seems like the more you're conscious about other people and what they think about you. And your desire is to please them rather than God. You don't like to ask questions about things. The big thing is scripture. Somebody says, well, this says this in the Bible on these scriptures. You don't know where it is. You go, oh yeah, that's right. You have no idea where it is. But you don't want to feel like I should know and I don't know. And that also stops you growing. If you're afraid to ask questions, you're afraid to say, I need to learn something, you don't grow. You're kind of stifled right there. Or you depend on yourself to learn things, etc., etc. You're not, like you grew in a home, you're really not supposed to ask a lot of questions. Whatever the dad or mom says, that's pretty much it. And there's a way you got to go. And you go against that, it really affects you. So one of the things Joe has to work with and together with the staff is people come in to the community here and want to work in Revolution 5 and have a heart for the vision, and they're full of shame. So in a sense, they come in, but they got to deal with the shame first in their life so they can be free, because the purpose of Revolution 5, and Joe's going to share after this, is so that they can be released to be leaders. And a leader's got to be free of that so they can walk in who God's called them to be. So I'll turn it back to Joe a little bit, share a little bit about Red 5 or anything else you got.
Yeah, I'd love to just ask you a question highlighting something you just said. If you were just making a connection, let's say that using the example you said, we brought somebody in, maybe in a staff capacity, to work in a leadership development context, and they had a lot of shame in their lives. How would shame impact them as someone who's attempting to lead inside of a context like this, or for that purpose, for anybody? How does shame impact somebody who's attempting to lead other people? Because
their main motivation would be to please people. They're always worried about what other people think. So instead of leading with what they feel is right, even if you take God out of the picture a bit, to lead what they think is right, they're always worried about what other people think. And what happens is there's also a lot of confusion with the person of shame. Because this person says this, but this person doesn't say this. This person says this. So they try not to hurt anybody. They try not to offend anybody, because their main goal is to make sure everybody's okay, that they don't really get anything done. And they can't make a decision. And if you can't lead if you don't know where you want to go. And you're so confused along the way. So shame comes in, and before you know it, the person doesn't know who he is. Even though they're very talented, very gifted, but their whole life has been based on shame, pleasing other people. And that has to be talked about, prayed about, and find out why it's there. We just recently saw somebody that very gifted, but so worried about what other people think that it actually causes physical problems in their body. It really does. A lot of times you sense that people are so worried about what people think is their stomach. They get problems in their stomach, tension on their shoulders, headaches. Because why? They're constantly worried about what other people think. Now, we need to be concerned about that. But these people are shame motivated, really strong. So it affects leadership because it stifles the very leader that God has created that person to be, and also stifles their giftings.
So a leader that is carrying a lot of shame will end up being stifled or immobilized because they're more heavily anchored to the approval or disapproval of the people they're trying to lead than they are the vision that God has given them to carry.
Exactly.
Wow. Okay. You also commented when we were in there with the staff here at Revolution 5 a few minutes ago about the connection between shame and creativity. So everybody knows, whether we're talking about in the marketplace, in the church, wherever it is, innovation, creativity is at the heartbeat. It's always at the forefront. So for sure, any leader fostering an atmosphere of creativity is one of the most powerful things you can do. So again, you have a leader who is carrying or comes in with shame. How does that negatively impact creativity in a culture?
To me, creativity of anything else is really a part of who you are. Creativity comes from within. This is you. This is your baby. This is who you are. Like an artist, they do a painting or a sculpture, and you look at it. That's who they are. And if you say something to it, well, I don't really like it, it doesn't look that good, they can get offended, so they pull back. Creativity is that part of us, more than anything, is connected to God. And when we stick that out, we're afraid people won't like it. When Julia and myself, we shared last week, when we started these casts, these video casts, we talked about it. What about if they don't like it? What about if I'm criticized on it? Now, we've come away, so it wasn't too big a discussion, but that was there. We're putting ourselves out there. You could listen to me and say, you don't know anything you're talking about. You're totally wrong, and I don't like you, and blah, blah, blah. But for creativity to flourish, I have to be willing to take a chance. See? I got to be willing to lay it out there. I got to be willing to say, I'm going to speak on this video cast, and eventually we'll go to YouTube and places, and realize that I could be criticized. But I got to be willing to lay it out. You know, and the thing that's important that gives me the strength to do it is I have really tied in some good relationships behind me. First of all, with God and my family in Montana, some of my family here. I am tied into them who know me, and if things come back at me, they're the ones that say, Larry, that was just some person, you still can do it, you're still creative. And because of relationships fosters creativity. Shame hinders relationships, and it pushes you into isolation. You see?
Wow.
It pushes you into isolation because you said something, the relationship, somebody didn't like it, so you back up. And last week we talked about when shame is being in you, you lean away, you don't lean in. And so we lean away from God, we lean away from friends, we lean back. And you lean back far enough, you isolate yourself. It's just you and maybe one other person, or you alone, who really understands you. And all of a sudden it's back up. Relationships are pushed away. And all because of the fact that somebody said something about your creativity and what you did. Motivated in shame.
Wow. Wow, Larry, that's in the time that we have remaining, there was one more point that I'd love to draw attention to. So we see the connection with shame and vulnerability, clearly a connection with shame and creativity, if nowhere else, for sure, in a leadership context. One more that you highlighted was the connection between shame and denial. When there's shame, it often creates or fosters denial inside of a culture or within a leader's context. Again, would you comment for a second, the connection between shame and that actually producing denial in people? How do you see that? What shape does that take?
Okay, for example, if first of all, we never like to admit our weakness. We never like to admit we don't know something. So we deny things, either with an action of silence. I don't want to say it, even I don't know what you're talking about. It's a denial there. We're wrong. If you're raised in a culture that really enforces rules through shame, like you can live in a family that what everybody thinks about the family is more priority than whatever you do. Parents discipline their kids because there's an embarrassment to other people, not necessarily did things wrong. And all of a sudden, somebody becomes free in that context. The parents don't even celebrate that because they don't want to admit that they created a family of shame. They deny our freedom. Even in the Bible, the blind man that was healed by Jesus, he was brought to the Pharisees, and the Pharisees, who healed you? What's going on? And he said, I don't know the guy's name. They call in the man's parents, and they said, who healed your kid? He was blind since birth. Who healed him? And the parents said, we don't know. You should talk to him. Okay? And then all of a sudden, nobody rejoiced. This man was blind all his life, and nobody rejoiced that he could see.
Wow.
The Pharisees didn't. His mom and dad didn't rejoice. And then he went and found Jesus and said, who are you? And Jesus said, I'm the Son of God. And if you live in this denial of shame and all that, You don't even rejoice when somebody's healed because it goes against your little perfect world that is controlled by using shame. You understand? And then you deny you have anything wrong. See?
Wow.
And then
Wow.
denial is a big thing because you cover it up. Oh, I'm okay. I'm okay.
More shame.
More shame.
Yeah.
More shame.
Yeah.
More shame. And it builds and builds and builds. And denial is a big thing. Denial, we deny if we're hurt. We deny if somebody hurt us. And then people even tell you sometimes, you shouldn't get hurt. You should never get hurt. You're a Christian. Well, that's a lie. Come on. This is a world we live in, right, guys?
Yeah.
We get hurt, and you didn't hurt me. But we don't want to say you hurt me. We deny that the way you treat and the way you said hurts me. We deny that. So what do you do with that pain? You stuff it. You keep stuffing it until all of a sudden the 5-gallon bucket's inside.
Blows up.
It's about 7 gallons, and it flows out. And that's because denial, on top of shame, keeps it all hidden. And we're afraid because we're not in an atmosphere of freedom. There is with Christ, but we need people who are willing to walk in vulnerability. And that was the whole teaching to the staff. Are you guys willing to walk in vulnerability? To admit you need help? You know, to admit I don't have all the answers. We're dealing with people's lives and talking about how they're doing. Are you willing to say, please give me some help?
Yeah.
See? And that's the importance. And that's what leaders are.
Yeah.
But denial and shame pushes you away and you isolate yourself.
Yeah. So, and Larry, you just highlighted this, but just to say it again, that the first step towards creating a shameless culture is to move towards vulnerability within a team, which obviously is a safe place, a whole lot of things around that, but that vulnerability is the first step about moving away from that. Obviously, in our context where we're creating leaders, by nature of leading, you're going to be moving resistant to opinions and prevailing winds and all that kind of stuff. I can say that from where we stand, one of the greatest killers of leaders is shame.
Yeah.
And so to hear you describe how this relates to vulnerability, how it relates to creativity, and even denial, man, that's a tall stack against any leader, let alone in our personal lives. So
Yeah.
some profound thoughts there, and I love, again, as you highlighted, that vulnerability is the first step we have to take in moving contra shame. And I believe it, see it all through Scripture. But powerful truth there in terms of finding a way out for freedom. I just want to say on behalf of myself, Joe Couch here with Revolution 5 Leadership Institute, and obviously Larry with Father's Ministry, thanks for taking a minute just to unpack shame a little bit and see how it impacts our lives. And maybe the first step that we have to take in vulnerability in terms of moving away from that so that we can begin to see freedom and really foster creativity and truth in the cultures that we live in and lead in. So,
Exactly.
thank you so much.
Hey, it's been a blessing. Joe's a good friend, him and his wife Annalise. They're like family to us. It's a blessing always to come down and meet this new bunch of people and see what's going on. God bless you guys. You have a good week, and we'll be back next week on Saturday probably, but we're a little early this week, but have a good day.